They didn't call it a prison. They called it a graveyard that still breathed. At the edge of the galaxy, beyond charts and prayers, there was a jail where gods were sent to be forgotten. No walls, only gravity fields that crushed willpower. No guards, only creatures that ate fear. Every cell held a monster that once ruled the world, until this place broke them. And then something fell from the sky like a burning star. Chains made from collapsed suns wrapped around his arms. His hammer was gone. His lightning was silent. The guards laughed until he stood, because they didn't know what he was. They didn't know this was the same being who challenged gods, shattered armies, and laughed in the face of death. They thought they had captured a prisoner, but what they had really done was drop a storm into a cage of monsters. And storms don't stay caged. Thor woke to a silence that didn't just mute sound, but swallowed it whole. A void so absolute it pressed into his chest, stealing the air. The sky above was a black that defied nature, a darkness that seemed to crush thought itself. Every muscle screamed, every bone ached, but the true burden was the gravity, an ancient, primordial force that bowed him as if the universe itself willed his collapse. He tried to summon Mjolnir, tried to call the lightning, tried to feel the storm pulse through him. Nothing. Only cold, lightless chains coiling around his wrists, binding him to the floor of a cell that was less a room and more a shard of living nightmare. Around him, shadows stirred. They were not beast or man, but forms twisting like smoke given malicious sentience. Eyes blinked into existence along elongated faces, fangs and tentacles and claws blossoming and shriveling in seconds. Thor's warrior instincts ignited, his heart hammering against the oppressive weight. He had survived wars that fractured nebulae. This, he knew with a chill certainty, was merely a test. The shifting horrors studied him, predators appraising prey. But Thor held still, watching, calculating, waiting for their move. He remembered the last moment before the fall, the sky splitting, an explosion of blinding light, then the violent tear of worlds. Odin's distant voice echoed, "Even a god can be broken, but even broken, he remains dangerous." That warning now resonated in the blood pounding through his veins, in the defiant fire burning low in his chest. Broken or not, Thor was still a force to be reckoned with. A shape lunged, not with speed, but with bone-crushing deliberation. Thor sidestepped a whisper of movement, letting the creature slam into the cell's dark walls. Its alien scream, sharp enough to vibrate the air, was answered by more. Shadows with talons, beasts with gaping maws that shimmered like molten black glass, converged. Thor didn't flee. He pivoted, grabbed the nearest chain, and swung it like a whip, snapping the neck of a creature as strong as a Jotun. Attackers came from all angles, above, behind, beneath. But he moved with predictable unpredictability. Every strike, every dodge, every spin was precision. Without Mjolnir, without lightning, his body remembered war as it remembered breath. And that memory alone made him lethal. Time stretched and warped. Minutes became hours or seconds, a meaningless concept in this dark. He fought, he survived, he observed. Each monster was unique. Some relied on brute force, others on illusions, projecting his deepest fears. Midgard burning, friends dying, worlds collapsing. Thor's teeth ground, his mind screaming, "I am not afraid. I am not yours." His defiance made the creatures recoil. Each attempt to break him with terror instead chipped away at their own predatory certainty. A claw tore through his shoulder, and he didn't even flinch. His blood spilled, but Thor's will flowed faster, stronger. He was a god, and even a chained god remained a storm waiting to break. Then he heard it, laughter. Not from the creatures, but from above, from the walls, from the very air. Alien, melodic, dangerous. The jailers. They watched. They tested. They calculated. One mistake, and Thor would die. But mistakes were not something Thor repeated. He stood amidst the wreckage of defeated creatures, chest heaving, arms bleeding, muscles trembling. He let the laughter wash over him. Not fear. Not anger. Not despair. Only a calm, deep as the void he inhabited. He didn't just survive. He dominated. Hours or cycles, passed, though time held no meaning here. Thor began to discern patterns. The creatures weren't chaotic. They moved with a rhythm, like pieces on a cosmic game board. He started predicting strikes, anticipating attacks. Slowly, subtly, he manipulated the battlefield. A flick here, a push there, small adjustments that seemed inconsequential, yet slowly altered the creature's behavior. Some began to hesitate. Some watched him with a nascent curiosity. Some almost showed respect. A warrior stripped of weapons, a god devoid of storm. Yet the primal apex instinct recognized him. Even monsters could see it. Then came the true test. The jailers sent not just creatures, but something older. Something that had witnessed stars collapse. A being so vast it bent the air around it. Its eyes were voids that swallowed light and sound. Its mouth opened, and Thor heard thoughts, not words, but pure intention, flooding his mind. Fear, doubt, anger, pain, a weaponized symphony designed to shatter his will. Break him, it commanded. Shatter the god. Scatter his bones across this cage. Thor's knees buckled for a fraction of a second. His mind screamed. His heart thudded in warning. But he clenched his fists, feeling the old fire stir, the one that had shattered armies and tamed cosmic storms. I am Thor, he thought. I am no one's prisoner. The clash that followed was beyond Midgardian comprehension. Thor moved like a hurricane of flesh and instinct. Each strike from the monster was precise, every counter from Thor measured. Yet Thor adapted faster, dancing through the attacks with a savage, almost musical rhythm. Blood sprayed. Scars deepened. Cracks spiderwebbed across the cell walls, as if the very prison understood its captive was extraordinary. Then, with a roar that shook the void itself, Thor struck the creature, not with raw strength, but with pure, unyielding defiance. A god could not be broken if his will burned brighter than his body ached. The monster faltered, hesitated, then vanished, not destroyed, but broken in spirit, leaving Thor standing, chest heaving, battered, bloodied, but undefeated. That was when he saw them, the other prisoners. Shadows, hulking beasts, creatures with eyes that had never seen kindness. They had been watching, first with fear, then curiosity, then something else, recognition. They saw that Thor moved differently, endured differently, was not like them, and not like the jailers. Something stirred among them, long buried beneath chains of terror, hope, or perhaps loyalty. Thor didn't speak. He didn't command. He simply moved, walked, breathed. And the prisoners followed, quietly, instinctively. Not out of love, not yet, but out of an acknowledgement that a being like this could not be trifled with. Thor was still a god without thunder, a warrior without his hammer, but in that alien graveyard, something had shifted. The silent recognition of power, of survival, of will, had begun. The monsters were no longer certain of their prey, and that, Thor thought, pain burning through him, was the first step toward reclaiming not just his freedom, but the storm that could not be caged. He stood, bloodied, bruised, exhausted beyond measure, and whispered to the void, needing no answer, I am coming. And when I do, nothing here will ever be the same. The walls of the alien prison shuddered as Thor was dragged into the arena. Not a cell this time, but a space vast enough to swallow planets. The floor rippled with black energy that stung his skin. The air reeked of iron, ozone, and death. Above, tiers upon tiers of cages held spectators whose eyes gleamed with hunger. They were not human, not gods, but alien beings with blade-sharp teeth, light-blotting wings, and claws that could pierce starship hulls. They were here to watch him die, or be entertained by his struggle. Thor's chains rattled as he rose. Pain radiated from every cut and bruise, from raw skin and strained muscle. Yet his eyes burned with fire. He scanned the arena. Shadows and monsters of all grotesque shapes moved in the corners, awaiting their cue. Some with 6 arms, some 4, some a gaping void where a face should be. Each had been broken, shackled, experimented upon, weaponized. Yet each remained lethal. The jailers had designed this arena as a test. Thor didn't care for tests. He cared for surviving. A horn sounded, not a Midgardian note, but a resonance that shook bone and stirred primal fear. The creatures moved. Thor braced. They charged not as one, but as a living tide of claws, teeth, and death. The first strike hit like a crashing world, an impact Thor had felt before. But he sidestepped, using the momentum to flip into a crouch. A monster with scales like liquid metal lashed its tail. He caught it mid-swing, yanking it off balance, twisting until it shrieked and collapsed. Another leapt from above, wings flaring like black suns. Thor rolled through a burst of dark fire, feeling heat singe his hair, then slammed his elbow into its chest. Bones cracked. It fell into a pool of acid that sizzled with every impact. The crowd roared, or perhaps it was the vibration of 1,000 worlds screaming in unison. Thor didn't flinch. He had stared down armies, faced death on 1,000 battlefields, outlived kings, tyrants, and gods. This arena, this galaxy, this alien prison, it was merely another battlefield. They came faster now. He had no hammer, no lightning, no shield. Only his fists, his instincts, and his unbreakable will. One struck from the left, obsidian-skinned with claws longer than his arm. He blocked with a chain, metal sparking against blade-sharp talon. Another charged from the right, jaws snapping with a sound that could rupture lungs. Thor ducked, swung his foot into its midsection, sending it spinning into a third attacker. Momentum became his weapon. Chaos became his shield. The arena shifted. Walls warped. The floor morphed. Gravity flipped sideways, then downward, then vanished entirely in bursts. Thor leaped, spun, landing on a floating shard of rock. A creature tried to follow, but he snatched it mid-jump, swung it like a club, and smashed it into a wall of shifting energy. He was dancing, moving through impossible angles and speeds that would break any mortal. But Thor was no mortal. Every strike, every dodge, every movement was art and war intertwined. A roar split the arena. From above, the jailers released their champions. Creatures older than stars, heavier than mountains, faster than light itself. Thor didn't falter. He launched himself into the air, spinning, striking one with a punch that cracked its skull. Another lunged, a mass of teeth and claws wrapping around him. He twisted midair, yanking it off balance, sending it crashing into a pool of molten metal that hissed and steamed. The tide of monsters slowed, hesitated. They had fought countless warriors, devoured, toyed with, crushed them. None moved like this. None stood in their storm of attacks, responding not just with strength, but with anticipation. Thor wasn't simply fighting. He was rewriting the rules of engagement. He was teaching them a lesson they hadn't known they needed. Blood flowed. His, theirs, mixing into the arena's black energy. But Thor pressed on. Lungs burned, muscles screamed, wounds reopened with every movement. Yet he had learned something in his first days in this jail. Survival wasn't just fury or power. It was understanding, observing, exploiting weaknesses. One snapped with jagged teeth. He grabbed a shard of the arena floor, flipped it like a shield, and slammed it into the beast, shattering bone. Another, faster, tried to circle. Thor predicted the move before it fully formed, spinning and tripping it over a fallen corpse. Something stirred inside him. The thrill of the fight, the spark of dominance that ignites when odds are overwhelming yet conquerable. His eyes glowed faintly, not with lightning, but with the fury of a god who had shattered armies. Even without the storm, Thor radiated power. The prisoners in the cages above murmured, alien voices yet unmistakable. This one is different. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the surrounding creatures. They were predators, killers, legends in their own right. Yet here was a warrior who did not fear. The arena shifted again. Towers of energy rose, walls split open, and a chasm of black fire appeared beneath Thor's feet. He leapt from shard to shard, his body bending through impossible angles. A creature lunged from the abyss, but Thor grabbed a fallen limb, used it as a lever, and sent the monster plummeting. Another came with claws that could slice starships. Thor caught them mid-strike, twisted, and slammed them into the floating shards. One by one, they fell, staggering, bleeding, broken, not dead, but defeated. Above, the jailers watched with irritation now, not amusement. Thor was not merely surviving. He was excelling. He was dominating. And the arena designed to break him was bending to his will. A pause came, brief but profound. Thor's chest heaved. Sweat and blood streaked his face. His body screamed, yet he didn't stop. He surveyed the fallen monsters, the hesitant creatures, and understood. These weren't just fights. They were statements. Every movement, every strike, every defiance of gravity and odds was a message. Thor wasn't just a prisoner. He was a god. Even without thunder. Even without Mjolnir. Even without the favor of the storm. Then, from the deepest shadows, a new threat emerged. Something vast, ancient, an apex predator of its galaxy before the jailers claimed it. Its eyes locked onto Thor, and the air itself seemed to shrink in fear. The arena vibrated. The spectators fell silent, not a single sound among millions of alien voices. Thor smiled, a grim twist of lips. Pain, fatigue, blood, none of it mattered. He had survived worse, conquered worse. And now, the ultimate test approached. As the monster charged, Thor braced. His fists clenched, his eyes blazed, his entire being coiled like a spring ready to explode. And when it struck, the arena trembled. The heavens themselves seemed to scream, and the fight escalated beyond any measure the jailers had imagined. This was no longer a battle for survival. This was a war for dominance. And Thor, the god without thunder, was about to remind the galaxy why legends are never imprisoned. The arena lay in ruins. Monsters were broken, bleeding, scattered across the blackened floor like fallen mountains. Thor stood in the center, chest heaving, sweat and blood dripping from his battered body. His muscles screamed, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. He had survived the impossible, outlasted creatures that ruled galaxies, defied the alien jail's very gravity. But survival alone was not enough. The prisoners, beings that had once been rulers, warriors, tyrants, watched from their cages with a mixture of fear, awe, and something unfamiliar: respect. Thor knew that in this place, survival was only half the battle. The other half was understanding the predator's rules. The jailers ruled not by walls or chains, but by fear. Every creature here had been broken, physically, mentally, spiritually. Yet they still held strength. Power even Thor recognized. But they had no leader, not yet. And leaders, Thor knew, could change everything. He didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. A nod, a glance, a simple act of defiance was enough. Slowly, cautiously, the prisoners began to move toward him, curious, hesitant, testing. They didn't attack. They didn't flee. They observed. Thor extended a hand, not as a command, but as a gesture of recognition. One creature, a hulking being with eyes like molten gold and stone-crushing claws, stepped forward. It sniffed the air around him, then lowered its head. A signal of submission, yes, but more profoundly, respect. Another followed, then another. Soon, Thor stood surrounded by beings who had once been kings and conquerors. Broken, yes, but still powerful. Still dangerous. But none dared challenge him. The aura of dominance, the unspoken assertion of survival and skill, radiated from him. Thor had always understood this instinct in warriors. In battle, strength alone was insufficient. The heart, the will, the ability to command respect. These were the true marks of power. And now, even in a cage designed to break gods, Thor commanded it. The jailers noticed. High above, in their observation towers, their forms shifted with irritation and disbelief. Thor, weakened, stripped of his hammer, denied the storm, was reshaping the prison in ways they had not predicted. He was no longer just surviving. He was organizing, influencing, shaping the chaos into order. They sent new creatures, monsters faster, smarter, more lethal than anything yet. But Thor moved among them like a force of nature, dodging, striking, turning attacks back on their originators. And with each victory, more prisoners began to follow. Not blindly, not out of love or simple loyalty, but because they saw leadership. and even the fiercest monsters instinctively obey. A leader emerges, and the rest fall in line. Thor's strategy wasn't about slaughter. It was demonstration. He allowed some attackers to strike, to fail, to recognize the futility of resistance. He fought when necessary, dominated when required, and withdrew when prudent. Slowly, patterns emerged. The prisoners began to mimic his movements, to watch and learn. They began to coordinate, even in silence. Thor had never taught a king to command, but in this alien graveyard, he became not just a survivor, but a master of the battlefield. And then the true test came. One of the jailers, a being whose very existence had survived supernovae and planetary collapses, descended into the arena. Its presence alone bent gravity, twisted time slightly, sending the remaining prisoners cowering into corners. Its voice echoed in Thor's mind, not words, but raw will: break him, bend him, show him the futility of resistance. The prisoners hesitated. The creature lunged. Faster than thought, it struck. Thor met the blow, chest colliding with the monster, pain searing through his ribs. Yet he did not falter. He twisted mid-strike, sending the monster crashing into a wall of energy. Another followed, then another. Thor fought not with rage, but with calculation, turning the overwhelming force against itself. The prisoners watched, and something shifted. Where once they had feared the jailers, now they feared the wrong creature. The god they had doubted, the warrior they had underestimated, was not merely surviving. He was dominating. He moved through impossible odds, reshaping the battlefield, controlling the chaos. His actions spoke louder than words. Follow me or be left behind. One by one, the prisoners began to act. A hulking beast that had once ruled the star system leapt into the fray, striking with precision, not mindless fury. Another manipulated the energy floor, creating openings, traps, and advantages. They were learning, adapting, coordinating. They were following. Thor had become their center, their anchor, their force of order in the chaos of the alien graveyard. And with leadership came challenge. One prisoner, a serpent-like creature with multiple eyes and stone-dissolving venom, tested Thor. It lunged, fangs snapping. Thor sidestepped, caught its tail, and swung it into another prisoner. The strike wasn't cruel, it was a lesson. Power was meaningless without control, without coordination, without understanding. Slowly, even the serpent nodded, a subtle gesture, an acknowledgement. Thor walked among the prisoners, now, every step deliberate. He inspected wounds, assessed capabilities, reinforced morale. There was no need for words. In the presence of true leadership, action spoke louder. The prisoners began to move as one, silently, efficiently, anticipating attacks, covering flanks, even initiating strikes. Thor had not just survived the arena. He had become its master. Above, the jailers seethed. They had built this prison to break gods, to crush the strongest beings in the galaxy, to dominate. And yet, the prisoner they underestimated had reshaped it entirely. The balance of power had shifted. Thor had not only survived, he had become a king, and kings inspire fear, respect, and loyalty. Even the monsters they had deemed dangerous were now part of his force, willingly following the god who had proven himself unbreakable. Thor's mind flicked briefly to Mjolnir. The hammer was still gone. The storm still denied him. But he realized something critical. He didn't need it yet. Leadership, strategy, and willpower. These were enough to bend even the deadliest creatures to his command. Even without thunder, even without lightning, even without his full divine strength, Thor had become a force no jailer could ignore. The arena itself seemed to recognize the shift. Gravity stabilized slightly. Energy flows aligned in ways that favored Thor and his followers. Creatures that had once attacked without thought now hesitated, now calculated, now understood that resistance without strategy was futile. Thor had turned chaos into order, fear into loyalty, weakness into strength. The prisoners no longer viewed him as merely a fellow captive. They viewed him as their king, a ruler forged in pain, in battle, in adversity. Thor did not claim the title. He did not need to. Leadership is not given, it is recognized. And in this cage of monsters, Thor's recognition was universal. And as he stood amidst the broken, bruised, and battered warriors, Thor understood a truth older than any god or jailer. Power is not measured by weapons, by size, or by fury. Power is measured by will, by presence, by the ability to inspire and command even those who have nothing left but survival instinct. In this alien graveyard, Thor had not just survived. He had risen. He had become the prison king. The sky of the alien prison shattered. Not literally, for there was no sky, but the air cracked with energy, a sound like 1,000 storms tearing reality apart. Thor's chest heaved, muscles screamed, body battered beyond reason. But he felt it. The faintest pull, a whisper through the void. Mjolnir. Across galaxies, across time and space, the hammer called, glowing faintly with recognition. Thor's eyes narrowed. The storm had heard him, and it was coming home. The jailers sensed it too. They paused mid-command, claws frozen, wings beating futilely against the pull of destiny. A god was about to rise. Not a prisoner, not a fighter without thunder, but the storm incarnate. Thor's chains exploded, not with brute force, but with the sheer intensity of the hammer's call. Metal twisted, light flared, and the gravity fields that had bound him shattered like glass. Thor didn't hesitate. He lunged, the air bending around him, every movement faster, stronger, sharper. The arena, designed to crush, was now a playground for a god reborn. From the far corners, the jailers unleashed their deadliest creations. Monsters that had survived supernovae, weapons that had crushed planets, beasts designed to break even legends. They charged in unison, claws, talons, venom, and fangs converging on Thor like a black tide. He didn't flinch. He moved through them like a hurricane, weaving and striking, spinning and dodging, his fists cracking bone, his knees smashing ribs. Every blow was precise, every dodge instinctual, and every movement whispered a terrifying truth. He was not merely alive. He was unstoppable. Then the hammer arrived. Mjolnir tore through space and time like a comet, slamming into Thor's outstretched hand. A surge of pure lightning engulfed him, lifting him, electrifying him, turning his wounds into searing fire, his pain into unyielding power. He roared, a sound that split the void and shook the jailer's towers. The arena itself responded. Energy flows bent to his will, gravity twisted under his command, and the prisoners, watching from their cages, gasped in awe. Thor was no longer the god without thunder. Thor was the storm incarnate. The jailers attacked with everything. A massive creature with moon-crushing tentacles lunged. Thor swung Mjolnir once, and lightning erupted, striking every tentacle simultaneously. The creature screamed, black energy burning its form, and fell, twitching, defeated. Another launched from above, wings flaring like eclipsing suns. Thor slammed Mjolnir to the ground, sending a shockwave that launched it high into the air and smashed it into a wall. Every strike, every crack of lightning, every boom of the hammer turned the jailer's certainty into chaos. Thor moved to the prisoners. They had followed him through the arena, battered and scared, but ready. With a gesture he guided them. Flank, attack, defend, strike. Monsters that had once been enemies now moved as one under his command. Their attacks, their strength, their fury amplified by Thor's presence, became a tide too powerful for the jailers to resist. Every blow he delivered, every move he made, was mirrored, supported, multiplied by the creatures who had once been broken. The arena had become a battlefield where Thor was both leader and ultimate weapon. Lightning danced across the walls, arcs of blue-white fire cracking through alien metal, carving runes of destruction in the air. Gravity shifted, energy surged, and Thor felt every attack as a challenge to the very essence of his being. The jailers hurled everything, psychic storms, creatures made of collapsing stars, but each failed. Thor moved faster than thought, struck harder than any weapon, commanding the battlefield like a conductor directing a symphony of destruction. A massive scream split the void. The jailers themselves had entered, colossal forms of shadow and crystal, wielding weapons that could obliterate planets. Thor didn't hesitate. He raised Mjolnir high, and lightning poured from his fingertips and the hammer alike, a torrent of divine fury. He struck the nearest jailer, sending it crashing into another, then spun through the battlefield, swinging, striking, dodging, landing blows that tore through impossible defenses. The energy of the arena bent to him, the very air around him alive with power. The prisoners surged forward. Thor moved with them, coordinating attacks, deflecting blows, giving commands without words. A massive creature that had devoured armies charged. Thor met it head-on, hammer swinging, lightning striking, and with a final roar, sent the beast flying across the arena. Another leapt from the shadows, claws extended. Thor twisted, struck, and shattered its limbs, leaving it unable to rise. Each victory amplified the prisoner's courage, turning fear into unbreakable resolve. Then the storm fully awoke. Thor's roar became thunder. His swings became lightning. His footsteps cracked the ground with divine resonance. Mjolnir glowed, pulsed, feeding off his fury, and every enemy felt it. The arena was no longer a cage. It was a crucible, forging Thor into something unstoppable. Unstoppable not just because of strength, but because of will, leadership, and the divine storm coursing through him. The jailers attempted one final assault. Waves of energy, monsters bred from galaxies, psychic storms meant to shatter minds. But Thor moved through them like a god among mortals. Lightning danced along his arms, Mjolnir spun in deadly arcs, and with a single strike, he shattered the ground, the walls, the cages above. The arena dissolved into chaos, but chaos under Thor's control. Every attack reflected, every strike countered, every move anticipated. Nothing could stop him. Not here. Not now. And then came silence. The remaining jailers paused. The surviving monsters hesitated, and Thor, standing amidst the wreckage, bloodied but more alive than ever, surveyed his domain. The arena, broken and scorched, was his. The prisoners looked at him with reverence, fear, and loyalty. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said it all. I am the storm. I am the god. I am the one who cannot be caged. Lightning surged through Thor one final time, illuminating the faces of every prisoner, every creature, every observer. The jailers had underestimated him. They had thought that chains, fear, and impossibility could break a god. They were wrong. Thor was not just back. He was stronger, faster, smarter. And the arena that had tried to destroy him was now his weapon, his stage, his empire. The prisoners roared, a deafening sound that reverberated through the alien jail. They had found a king. Thor, battered and scarred, bloodied but unbroken, had not only survived the arena, but transformed it into a kingdom. The storm was back, and it would not be denied. And across the galaxy, from one edge to the other, whispers began to spread. A god fell into the prison of monsters, and became its master. The air was electric, crackling with the aftermath of Thor's fury. The arena, once a cage designed to break gods, lay in ruins. Towers toppled, walls shattered, energy fields fizzled and collapsed into nothingness. The prisoners, beings that had once been rulers of galaxies, monsters that had devoured planets, stood in awe, battered, bruised, but vibrantly alive. They had witnessed the impossible. They had watched a god rise from chains, survive horrors, command loyalty, and unleash the storm itself. Thor stood at the center, Mjolnir in hand, lightning still coursing over his body. His chest heaved, his muscles burned, bloodied but unbroken. His eyes scanned the arena. Every creature, every prisoner, every surviving jailer trembled under the weight of his presence. He didn't need to speak. Power spoke for itself. Respect, fear, and awe flowed toward him in waves, an unspoken acknowledgement. He had irrevocably changed everything. The jailers, massive and terrifying beyond imagination, tried to regroup. They had underestimated him. They had created monsters to kill gods, only to be outmatched by one. They hurled attacks, psychic waves meant to shatter minds, gravity spikes meant to crush bones, energy storms meant to burn flesh. Thor moved like a force of nature. Lightning leapt from his hammer, striking with pinpoint precision, crushing weapons, collapsing structures, and scattering attackers. He was faster than thought, stronger than expectation, smarter than any opponent. Each movement was both destruction and art, both survival and domination. The prisoners followed. They had learned from him, coordinated with him, trusted him. When the jailers launched their next wave, the creatures fought alongside Thor, not as pawns, not as mere followers, but as warriors inspired by a god who had earned their fierce loyalty. Together, they became unstoppable. Monsters that had once been rivals now moved as one under Thor's guidance, striking with precision, covering flanks, exploiting weaknesses, turning the jailers' overwhelming numbers into chaos. Thor advanced, the storm amplifying with every step. Energy arced around him, Mjolnir spinning, lightning cracking through the alien sky. Every jailer he faced was crushed, hurled into walls, ripped apart by the raw force of the storm. Their attacks, once unstoppable, now shattered before reaching him. The arena itself trembled, responding to the god who had become more than a prisoner. He was now the master of this place, the apex, the storm incarnate. He moved to the central tower, where the jailer's command hub pulsed with dark energy. Every step was a declaration. Every swing of Mjolnir was a sentence. The remaining jailers tried to resist, but Thor was unstoppable. Chains of lightning erupted from the hammer, wrapping around energy conduits, crushing them, tearing the heart of the prison apart. The tower exploded in a cascade of fire and energy, the core of the jail's control system destroyed, and with it, the remaining jailers fell back in disarray. The prisoners roared, a deafening sound that echoed across the shattered arena. Thor raised Mjolnir high, letting the storm surge one final time. Lightning tore across the void, striking the walls, the floors, the remnants of the cages, shattering them completely. Monsters that had once been broken, enslaved, and terrified were now free. But Thor didn't leave them unchecked. He had forged them into a force, a new order born from chaos. They would remember this day, this god, this storm. And the jailers would never forget. Thor walked among the prisoners, a god in chains no longer, a king without a throne. He had transformed the alien graveyard into a legend. One by one, the survivors recognized him, not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as an embodiment of what it meant to be unbreakable. Fear, respect, loyalty, all flowed toward him in profound silence. The prison had been designed to erase beings from history, to crush gods into oblivion. But Thor had rewritten the rules. He had turned the cage into a crucible, the battlefield into a forge, and himself into a living legend. Above, across the void, the signals of the galaxy began to stir. Ships, colonies, and civilizations that had only heard whispers of the prison now sensed the colossal shift. A god had risen where none should survive. A storm had unleashed in a place that promised nothing but death. The tale of Thor in the alien jail would spread faster than light, faster than the cries of war. Across systems, across worlds, across generations, beings would speak of the god who could not be caged. Thor paused at the center of the arena, chest heaving, eyes burning like twin suns. Around him, the prisoners, no longer slaves, no longer merely monsters, but a force shaped by his very presence, bowed in acknowledgement. They were no longer prisoners. They were soldiers of the storm, witnesses to divinity, carriers of a legend that would outlive even the stars themselves. Thor had not only survived the jail, he had mastered it. Then he turned away. He did not destroy the prison entirely. Not yet. The walls, the shattered towers, the broken cages, they were reminders, warnings. The jailers who survived would carry stories, whispers, and fear across the galaxy. The prisoners he left behind would carry his legacy. And the universe, vast and unending, would remember one immutable truth. Gods cannot be caged. Storms cannot be chained. Legends cannot die. As Thor ascended, Mjolnir glowing fiercely in his hand, lightning tearing through the void, he looked back one last time. The alien jail, the arena of nightmares, had been broken, but its shadow remained. And from that shadow, a message would spread. There was a prison for gods, and one god turned it into a warning. The storm followed him beyond the cage, beyond the edges of the galaxy, across stars and systems. Wherever chains were forged, wherever tyrants built walls, wherever the impossible imprisoned the strong, the name would echo, Thor. And the universe understood. Some storms do not stay caged, and the universe understood. Some storms do not stay caged. The prison became legend. The story became myth. And the god who had been thrown into the galaxy's most dangerous jail returned not just unbroken, but unstoppable. Galaxies trembled. Prisoners cheered. Monsters roared. And one god, bloodied, battered, and blazing with the storm, walked free, leaving a legacy no one would ever forget.